God's got this. Day 1 of our 40-day journey together towards fearlessness. And this story's about Abram. And this morning as I was reading it and praying about it, it just struck me. Abram, he attacked these guys at night to rescue Lot. And then he goes back and he's living in a tent. Okay, he doesn't have a moat. He doesn't have a castle. He doesn't have a guard. He doesn't even have a wall. He just got like a bed sheet hung around him. And what would keep these 5 kings from seeking revenge on him? And I just can't help but wonder if Abraham is afraid of the repercussions. He's like, I know how easy it is to attack someone in the middle of the night and totally kick butt. And I think he was afraid of that because God comes to him and he says, Abram, I am your shield. Now, this is the first time a shield has been mentioned in the Bible. And it's so cool because God says, Abram, I'm your shield. And then a couple verses later, Abram believed and it was credited to him as righteousness. That belief is faith. And so this is the first time we see the shield of faith in the Bible. And God is saying, Abram, your fears are invisible and they're out there in the future. You're worried about what might happen in the future. I'm going to protect you. So God, it's like he demolishes an invisible fear with an invisible promise. It's so cool how God works. He goes to where our fears are and he speaks to them in that very place. You see, Abraham wasn't looking at an army coming towards him. Abraham was worried that an army might come towards him. And I looked at my fears and I wrote 11 because I just got on a roll. And 10 of my 11 fears are future fears. They're fears that I'm like, I hope this doesn't happen to me. I'm afraid of that happening. It's not that they've actually happened. It's just I'm afraid that they might. They're future invisible fears. And what God does in this story is he speaks to those invisible fears with invisible promises. He said, I'm going to be your shield. So he's talking about protecting us. And I'm going to be your very great reward. You see, Abram rescued Lot and he didn't get any loot out of that. He didn't take any rewards. And maybe that sometimes feels like our life, things happen and it's just not fair. Like, hey, I should have gotten something out of that. Hey, that should have turned out better for me. And God's like, hey, I will make it right in the end. There's this idea that God is the judge and he's the final judge. And that makes a lot of people nervous because they know they've got like hidden sins and they're worried like, I really don't like that God's the judge. But in the ancient Hebrew culture, a judge is someone who makes things right. So if you've been taken advantage of, you want the judge, okay? If you've been hurting people, you're afraid of the judge. But see, God is saying he's not here to like nitpick our little foibles and mistakes. He's here to make things right. And he's like, hey, Abram, you risked your life and you fought 5 kings in the middle of the night and you won and you didn't get any riches out of it. I'm going to take care of you. And we know that he does. Abraham dies many, many years later. He is very, very wealthy. And God fulfilled his promise. He protected him. Abraham was never attacked. Abraham was never on the run. Abraham was protected his entire life. And so this story spoke to me because God is saying, Grant, you're afraid of things that could happen. I mean, even when I look at the news, I'm afraid of what could happen in the election or what could happen if they start mandating masks and vaccines. What could happen? And if you're an Adventist, you've grown up in the culture of the time of trouble before Jesus comes back. What could happen then? And like all of these fears are out there. The children of Israel, as they were going through the wilderness, they never ran out of food or water. They got low. And when they got low, they freaked out because they imagined the future of starvation and dehydration and their children dying, but they never actually ran out. You see, God says, I'm going to take care of you. Like right now, things are okay. For me, they're okay. They're not amazing, but they're okay. And God's like, I'll take care of you. And no matter what happens in the future, I'm your shield. I'm your reward. And when I believe that, I'm like, you know what, God, I'll take that. When I look into the future and choose, instead of to see my fears, to see God's promises, to see his shield surrounding me and my family, to see his reward making everything right, that brings me inner peace. And the Bible says that is credited to Abram as righteousness. You see, for my whole life, I always felt like righteousness was like being perfect, like never messing up. And I messed up big time yesterday, or then the day before. Like, I'm not a perfect person. And God's like, you know what? Righteousness is looking to the future and trusting that I will be your shield. I love the memory verse for today about how God says, I'm your light. I'm your salvation. You don't have to be afraid. I'm your fortress. I will protect you. You don't have to tremble. Look at me, is what he's saying. And so day one for fearlessness, God's got this. He is our shield, and he'll take care of you. God bless.